Hey everybody, you are listening to the Jeff Rubin Show. I am Jeff Rubin, and I am very excited that this week one of my all-time favorite guests is back on the show. Please welcome back a man who did his PhD thesis on Batman, Dr. Will Brooker.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for having me again.
And we talked about the thesis itself and your career the last time you were on the show, but today we are here, obviously, to talk about Dark Knight Rises. I have seen the movie at this point. Will has seen the movie 3 times, and we are going to jump directly in to the deep end of the spoiler pool. We are going to be talking about every aspect of this film in detail, so if you haven't seen the movie yet, go see it. You can catch up on episode 15, Will's first appearance, while you're on the way, because we are about to talk about the ending and everything else.
Spoiler warning. That was a good spoiler warning. No one could blame you now. They don't want to hear spoilers, they should leave now.
I think they're gone. I think it's just us now.
All right.
Holy shit, was that movie good.
Holy hole in the donut. Yeah, that was a good, it was certainly a good movie. I've seen it 3 times now, Jeff, and I felt slightly differently about it all the times I saw it, actually.
How so?
Well, the first time, I think if you're going to something with a lot of anticipation and expectation, you're kind of nervous and really hoping the film isn't going to let you down. So during the first screening, I wondered if my hopes were too high. And whenever anything happened in the movie that kind of seemed to drag a little bit or was slightly disappointing, I was like, oh no, is it gonna go off the rails now? I was really hoping so much that the film wouldn't let me down compared to Dark Knight Dark Knight, which I really loved. So for the second screening, I could relax more and enjoy the movie for what it was. But actually, the technical quality for the second one wasn't so good. I saw it in IMAX for the first and the third times. The second one, I was quite a way away from the screen. The sound system in the cinema was worse. And as everyone will know who's seen it, some of the dialogue is quite difficult to hear at the best of times. Bane's dialogue, and you've got Batman growling, and Gordon's in hospital at one point speaking through a mask. So there's an awful lot of mumbling. The third time I really enjoyed because I saw it again in IMAX. I was sitting in prime position, and I was able to concentrate on things I might have missed the first 2 times. I was able to relax, know how good the movie was, and start to focus more, I think, on its detail and its themes and the way that it ties into the first 2 movies in the trilogy.
This is probably one of the most anticipated, like in a fanboy type of way, movies ever. And the first time you're seeing it, you almost have to block out the fact that you're finally seeing this movie and be like, oh wait, let me see what's actually going on. Because it's like the others, it's kind of a deep movie.
Yeah, it's pretty complex actually. I mean, I'm still can't quite decide if Nolan's plots are ambitiously complex or if there's slightly flawed. There's an awful lot going on, and some information is conveyed very quickly in short scenes, and there's a very big expanded cast of kind of businessmen and dealers, just like in the first 2 films. There's various gangsters and organized crime mobsters. So there's a lot of people to follow, and there's a lot of kind of business deals going on and stuff about finance and nuclear reactors, which is difficult to follow, I think, on the first viewing. I'm not sure if it is the case that perhaps Nolan's films aren't the strongest on plot. They're very strong on kind of theme and character moment, I think, and spectacle. But I thought I had to see it a few times to just catch what was going on in some of the scenes.
So I have only seen the movie once. What did you catch seeing it a second time, seeing it a third time? What did you notice that you didn't see that first time?
Okay, that's a good question. Let me think about that. There's one thing I'm still puzzling over, actually, which is, and you might be able to answer this for me. Why is it with Leonid Pavel in the first scene? What's the business with the blood transfusion that Blaine is giving him?
That's a good question.
Okay,
yeah, I forgot about that.
I was wondering, and on the third time, I kind of started thinking, is that because they put the blood of a dead man they put Pavel's blood in a body?
Oh,
and
yeah.
Body crash so that Pavel will be identified on the ground.
But you don't identify someone by blood, do you?
Blood? No, I don't know. That was confusing.
I do think that that's a pretty good guess because they do talk about later you see someone saying, oh, he died in a plane crash.
That's right.
So that's a pretty good guess, and I think that's probably right. It's definitely a cool moment, just how casually Bane is operating this medical equipment in essentially zero gravity.
Yeah, while he's floating in free fall, yeah. There's a lot of, I guess what I've been noticing more and more is just the number of times the motif of rising and falling and fire recurs throughout the movie in different contexts. It's very, very interesting. I was just doing a real kind of scholarly job when we started talking and writing up all the notes I took in my third screening in a notebook. I was just typing them all up. I've got 5,000 words so far. The number of times that characters kind of rise from their social class, climb out of their conditions of birth, the thing about how someone was raised, how they were brought up. Selina Kyle is in her walk up in Old Town. Bruce Wayne is born in privilege. It's stressed a number of times that he was born, in the Regency room in Wayne Manor. Bane, of course, is born and raised in Hell on Earth. So it's kind of about to what extent can you escape your upbringing, and to what extent can you have a clean slate and a new start? To what extent can you reboot yourself? So the thing I've been noticing more and more is that these very clever, really underlying themes, which I think are woven through the entire trilogy from Batman Begins. To what extent can you restart your life and leave behind your old life? Bruce Wayne goes into exile for 7 years during Batman Begins. Then he goes into exile for 8 years between The Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises. Well, one thing I thought about that's pretty much exactly the time between Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin and the reboot. So there's a bit of a meta thing there, that Batman goes into exile, but he always returns. And there's this idea of you try and get away from something, but it always comes back. One other thing I noticed, other fans I think have noticed this, is the end scene is almost a tribute to Adam West. Some days you can't get rid of a bomb. Adam West carrying a bomb around in the 1966 movie above his head, trying to dispose of a bomb. So it's I think that could be almost an affectionate way of reincorporating the campiest Batman into the darkest Batman, just to say you can't ever get a clean slate. Like Selina Kyle's looking for this clean slate device all the way through, we know, and Daggett says to her, that's a myth, it doesn't exist. Well, it does exist in that Bruce Wayne has bought it, but at the same time, when Selina Kyle and Bruce Wayne try and get that clean slate at the end of the movie, Alfred still knows who they are, and they're still linked to each other. They're away in Florence together. So, and Blake still knows that Batman is alive. So it seems to be partly about the idea that you can't ever fully get away from your history. Your history will always come back.
I want to go back to that bomb thing for a second. So for those that haven't seen the 60s Batman movie, still the greatest Batman movie of all time, even with yesterday's release of The Dark Knight Rises. I love that 60s Batman movie. There is a hilarious scene, and I think intentionally hilarious. I think the 60s Batman people knew what they were doing. There's a very funny scene where Batman, played by Adam West, is running around with a giant, cartoon bomb over his head. And it's actually quite a funny, comedy scene because, he's trying to find somewhere to put it. He turns the corner, and there's, nuns, and then there's, a marching parade, and there's all this, hilarious escalating series of things that stop him from being able to dispose the bomb, kind of like at the end of this movie. But that seems like maybe it's just a superhero thing. For instance, we saw it earlier just this summer. I thought that scene reminded me of the climax of Avengers. And I'm going to go out on a limb and assume you saw the Avengers, just like everyone who listened to this podcast.
Yeah, I've seen Avengers, yeah.
But if you haven't seen it, I'm about to talk about the climax. Avengers also ends with Tony Stark, Iron Man, also kind of heroically sacrificing himself to get a bomb outside of a city.
It's true.
So is that possibly just a superhero motif?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. It's a kind of heroic motif, isn't it? The idea of self-sacrifice.
And I mean, the other one that it really reminded me of, and we're going back and sort of stretching the definition of superhero here, and I'm sure there's earlier examples too, but the end of The Iron Giant. Have you seen The Iron Giant?
No, I read the book.
Oh, you got to see The Iron Giant. It's the absolute best. And I just spoiled the end for you a little bit.
Well, no, this happens in folk stories and in religious texts as well. The idea of the Messiah dying and coming back is a pretty common religious theme. And in Frank Miller's, I think it's probably directly informed by Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, because in that, Bruce Wayne dies at the end, or seems to die, but then comes back. And I think Nolan was probably drawing specifically on that seminal Batman story.
Nolan, it's really interesting how he seems to have drawn very specifically from a lot of stories. Obviously, this evokes, I didn't even connect that, but you're right, that's there. Also, Nightfall, the story where we first met Bane. No Man's Land, the story where Gotham's kind of abandoned by the government. Nolan's obviously reading Batman comic books, and he's drawing very specific things from them, but he's also creating things out of whole cloth, and something I kind of wanted to get your take on, because I don't know the comics that well. It's just I'm so interested in the parts he borrowed, what the different things he borrowed from, because he borrowed from several different sources from several different eras, and also what he chose to create. Because after reading all those Batman comics, and choosing all these specific things, the fact that he would still go out on a limb and create something new, like the John Blake character, it's interesting to me. Why would he, what couldn't he find in the Batman comics that he felt like he had to make something up for?
Well, John Blake is kind of new, but not new, because effectively he's Robin. I mean, it's a very, very clever way of introducing Robin. without getting fans' backs up, because by the time we realise he's Robin, we already love him. I think that's a very, very clever way of doing it, because we're rooting for John Blake all the way through. He's a brilliant character. He's very strong, very honest, very plain speaking, just a kind of beat cop with a sense of duty. And by the time in the final penultimate scene, he reveals that he was Robin all along, effectively. I mean, his name is Robin, but he is the Robin character, really. We already like him that much that we don't care. Whereas I think if he'd come along, I'm beat cop Dick Grayson, people would have been groaning in the cinema. So, no, Nolan really pulled something off there. I think that was the only way to do it, considering the hostility that a lot of people have about the whole idea of Robin, because it kind of compromises Batman's dark, solo, lone vigilante Avenger status, and also because Chris O'Donnell sort of didn't do a job that everyone liked in the Joel Schumacher movies, so there was a lot to get over there.
Well, I mean, say what you want about the Joel Schumacher movies. I don't think any of that's Chris O'Donnell's fault.
No. Well, chicks love the car. He said a lot of lines which, he didn't have to do all that. There's a lot of things which I think pretty much everyone involved in the Joel Schumacher movies should be pretty ashamed of themselves. It's a bit of a hot mess, isn't it, that movie?
It sure is. And we talked about that last time, and something else we talked about last time is how you are a Batman academic, and how there was these Joel Schumacher movies that kind of made a mockery of the character, and not in a fun way like the Adam West movies, the Adam West movie and the TV show, and that this Christopher Nolan trilogy was really a godsend for someone like you who is taking Batman seriously and studying it. So I can't imagine how much time you spent anticipating this movie and thinking about this movie before it came out. And even with all that, did the Robin twist surprise you? Did you see that coming? I
kind of did, actually. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have to just say this because I was publishing a lot of articles before the movie came out, because, the media was sort of asking me what I was expecting in the Batman, in the new Batman film. So I wrote a few articles with my predictions, and actually I'm happy to say they did pretty much come true, because going back to your earlier point about Nolan was obviously reading the comics. In the comics that have clearly informed Nolan, particularly in the recent ones where Dick Grayson is actually playing the role of Batman, there's a lot of precedent for someone else in the Batman cowl and cape, and I think Nolan was drawing that idea from various comics. So I think it was possible to predict it. I think what he did very cleverly was not reveal that until the very, very last moment.
As soon as Joseph Gordon-Levitt's involvement were attached, I think there was immediately a lot of speculation that he could be playing Robin, and they held that very close to his chest. And in retrospect, of course, that was where they were going with it. He was such a major part of the movie. Like, as I was watching the movie, I was thinking, wow, there's a little Joseph Gordon-Levitt detective story in here, So it seemed clear he was going to become something major, but I was still, I don't know, just because I think they had talked so much over the years about how they didn't want to do Robin, I really didn't expect to see him.
No, it's right. Christian Bale explicitly said something like he was going to chain himself to a radiator if they tried to bring in Robin. So I think that sounded pretty conclusive.
And they didn't really, because you never really see Robin.
Well, he is effectively Robin, but it's just introduced very cleverly. And also I think it was very well done the way they played their cards to their chest by not including Gordon-Levitt in the trailers all that extensively. I mean, he still seemed like quite a minor character from the trailers. You're right, he gets an awful lot of screen time, and his detective work drives the story for a lot of it when Bruce Wayne is out of action. So, I mean, certainly by the time Bruce Wayne says, if you're going to work alone, you should wear a mask, I think we know what's going to happen by the end of the movie. That's the giveaway line, I think.
I thought that might be the moment where he's like, here's your costume.
Yeah.
And even when he gave him something to throw, right, and he was like, throw it and stand back, I was like, oh, is a Robin costume going to explode out of this ball?
I was expecting him to bring out a mask, yeah. Here, have this.
Did the other major twist in the movie, the inclusion of Talia al Ghul, did her inclusion surprise you?
No, it didn't really. Again, I think they handled it very well by denying it until the last minute. I mean, the film did very, very well, considering, like, as Selena Kyle says in the movie, that a 12-year-old with a cell phone can find out so much about everything these days. Considering the age we're in, of spoilers and fan speculation and people filming stuff from the locations where it was shot and all the gossip circulating around, they did so well to not let those surprises out the hat. Having said that, though, I was expecting it just because it's going to tie back into Batman Begins. You know that Ra's al Ghul is going to appear in a flashback and the young Ra's al Ghul will appear. I say Ra's al Ghul because that's how Denny O'Neil says it, the person who created it, but they say it Ra's al Ghul in the film, but I'm going to carry on with my pronunciation.
I'm on board for that. That sounds like
Raish. It sounds more exotic, doesn't it?
How do they say it in the animated series?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I'm in general pretty anal about spoilers. You can probably tell by listening to the show, and I try to avoid so hard just learning anything about the movie, and I did a pretty good job, but I think they made a pretty big deal. The one thing I knew was coming was that Liam Neeson was in the movie, which was kind of surprising because he has a small cameo towards the end, and I wish I didn't know for sure he was going to be in it. I think they publicly put that out.
Well, I certainly heard that, yeah. I don't think that's a massive spoiler because...
No, of course not, but it's kind of a surprise when he shows up on screen.
Well, he doesn't... It's a memory of him, isn't it? Yeah, it kind of is him and it isn't him. It's Bruce Wayne's imagining him. There's more than one way to become immortal, as he says. It's a kind of... Well, he appears in flashback, of course, and then Bruce Wayne imagines him in his fevered dream when his back is mending. I think they had to do that because The Dark Knight is actually quite different from Batman Begins. So what Dark Knight Rises had to do was pull those two, weave those two back together, and that I think it does very, very well.
It's very unusual in a movie that you see a fever dream spirit guide give bad advice, but what he says, the revelation that Bane was the son, is actually not true.
I don't think he does say that. I don't think he does because now I've seen it 3 times. Every time Bruce Wayne says, Bane was Ra's son, Bane was the child. No one actually goes, yes, you're right. They just changed the subject. It all comes from Bruce Wayne going, someone says like, the Tom Conti character in The Pit says, a child climbed out the pit. And Wayne's like, Bane, it was Bane. And he never actually says, yes, you're right. He just says, legend says that a child climbed out. And when he's talking to Ra's al Ghul, the imaginary Ra's al Ghul, he says something like, Bane was your son, Bane was your heir. Ra's just says, an heir to the League of Shadows or something which is ambiguous, because that is what he is. He doesn't say, yes, my son. He says, yes, he was an heir, as Bruce was going to be an heir to the League of Shadows. Also, we should bear in mind that Ra's al Ghul is coming from Bruce Wayne's head at this point, so he's not going to say anything that Bruce doesn't really know or believe. But I think the dialogue is very cleverly done, that it doesn't actually explicitly say it. It does lead us on, but it never confirms that Bane is Ra's son. Was
there anything about the movie that did surprise you?
Well, it kind of surprised me. Well, the twist kind of surprised me in a pleasant way at the time because I was surprised they left it so long. I think they left it so long before springing those twists until the very last half hour, the last 5 minutes. That it was pleasant. It was pleasant to see how they did it. I guess by that point, I'd sort of thought, oh, they're not going to do it. I had kind of half expected it. And because the movie was nearly over, I was thinking, well, perhaps they're not going to play it that way. And then it was nice the way they revealed their hand. I did think that Batman was probably going to die. So I guess it surprised me that Bruce Wayne didn't, because I thought that Bruce Wayne could feasibly, genuinely die at the end of the movie and that John Blake would carry on his legacy. So the penultimate shot where Alfred sees Wayne still alive actually was a lovely surprise. I wasn't actually expecting that. I thought that Nolan could kill off Wayne but make the point that Batman was more than just a man. He's a symbol, he's a myth.
That was one thing that didn't surprise me. I think you can't end a major Hollywood movie with Batman dead. Even if you're Christopher Nolan, you can't kill Bruce Wayne.
Well, no, look, the whole point is that Nolan's making the point that Batman isn't just Bruce Wayne. He said that from Batman Begins, that Batman is an idea, he's more than just a person. So I think it would have been possible for Bruce Wayne to die because Batman was going to continue. That was the whole point, that Blake would continue as Batman. Batman is bigger than just one man. But I think it was nice. It was a very nice ending that Bruce Wayne has found peace and happiness, and that Alfred is able to see his fantasy come true. That Bruce Wayne has found another life outside of Gotham. It's a very generous ending.
Yeah, something else we talked about last time you were on the show. In fact, I remember saying how it's almost sad to me that Bruce Wayne never gets to retire in the comic books because Batman comics have to be produced all the time, forever. Especially now that's probably more popular than ever. And you can never have an ending in comic books the way you can for a TV show or a movie. And it seemed like this is one of the first times I've ever seen, is Bruce Wayne really retired here? You don't usually get just an ending to the Batman story.
No, you don't. That's one thing that movie trilogy can do. Particularly, a movie trilogy which we understand is like, this is the Nolan verse, this is Nolan's take on Batman, it's kind of auteurist, it's this one director's idea. And so he has the privilege, the ability to say, I'm just going to make 3 films about Batman, this is one story, it's going to start here, it's going to follow through a coherent trajectory and arc, and then it's going to end. And you're right, comics can't really do that. There have been long periods where Bruce Wayne has been out of the picture and someone like Dick Grayson or John Paul Valley has taken over. But Bruce Wayne does always come back. Even in stories like Kingdom Come and Batman Beyond, the older Bruce Wayne, and at the end of Dark Knight Returns, actually, the older Bruce Wayne might not be actually physically active, but he's commanding some kind of younger avatar of himself, a younger Batman or an army of sons of the Batman. So, yeah, it's something you can do in a movie trilogy, which you can't really do in monthly comics because they have to continue. But having said that, the John Robin Blake Batman, or whatever his full name is, could continue. We could have another Nolan film in theory where we have a younger John Blake Batman. So Batman would carry on.
Could you really? I mean, I know they set it up like almost teasing that they could. It's hard to imagine they will. I just can't imagine a Batman movie that doesn't star the character of Bruce Wayne.
Well, there's been a lot of Batman comics that don't star the character of Bruce Wayne. I personally don't think Nolan will, and I hope that he won't, because I think what he's done, which is very nice, is give those strands for fans to imagine in their heads. I think it's almost like a gift for fans. Some fans do their fan art, they write fan stories, but anyone who really loves a story is going to imagine, I wonder what a John Blake Batman would be like. I mean, I'm not going to sit down and write old fan fiction or anything, but...
Don't worry, someone's on the case.
Someone's doing it. Someone's doing it.
That is definitely going to be taken care of.
It is going to be taken care of, and I think someone's also going to write Jen, Selena Kyle's friend, as the next Catwoman. I think that's also implied that there's a process of mentorship there, that her young friend is going to take over the mantle of the Cat and become like an ally or an antagonist for the John Blake Batman, Jen and John. But I think it's nice that Nolan just says, look, the stories are always going to carry on. I'm not going to tell them, but the strands are there for other people to pick up.
Even though there have been other characters that have worn the mantle of the Bat, it's always been a matter of time until it was Bruce Wayne again. Like when John Paul Valley, Azrael, became Batman in the 90s, I don't think anyone thought that was lasting forever. And even recently, when Bruce Wayne was dead and traveling through time, I don't totally understand what happened there, and Dick Grayson was being Batman, I think everyone knows Bruce Wayne's back on the way, and that at some point Batman is, the story of Bruce Wayne.
I think you're probably right there, yeah.
And this is something we talked about, too, last time. It's like you can play with some of the facts. Is Catwoman an evil? Is she good? But there's certain things that make, Batman, Batman, and part of it is the mythological journey of Bruce Wayne, his origin and all that.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be that he's Bruce Wayne, but it does pretty much, it does have to be that he's a billionaire and that he's an orphan. A John Blake Batman would be different, and so would a Dick Grayson Batman. I actually like Dick Grayson as Batman, but I agree, it never seems to last long term. There is something inherent about Batman that seems to be tied up with who Bruce Wayne is. That he's a scientist, he's self-taught, that he's got his technology. I mean, Blake isn't really the kind of person to design. Really, we don't ever see him working with Lucius Fox. He's not a billionaire. He doesn't have an understanding of business. We can't see him really getting military contracts and developing equipment of the kind that Wayne did. So I think we have to take Nolan's as a kind of separate, imaginary, hypothetical story about Batman. It's a kind of compressed story about Batman which exists differently to ongoing comic book continuity. It's a self-contained tale.
And isn't all Batman continuity like that in the end? Like All-Star Batman and Robin, Frank Miller's new comic, is also its own continuity. Like at some point, if you want to do anything with the character, you might have to end in a place where he doesn't become Batman again.
Well, not all continuity is. I mean, you named one there. Miller's All-Star.
I'm just saying it's not unprecedented like in comic books. Like the animated series is also its own world. 60s Adam West Batman, that's also its own Batman continuity, for better or worse.
That's true. It's true. There's a lot of precedent for it. Yeah, you've got the Nolan verse, the Miller verse, and so on. I guess, the 60s is its own kind of verse as well. The animated series verse. These things do tie in with each other, though. The animated series introduced Harley Quinn, who then crossed over into mainstream continuity. The Mr. Freeze of the animated series crossed over into mainstream continuity. Frank Miller's Dark Knight Year One and Dark Knight Strikes Again and All-Star Batman and Robin seems to be separate, but the mutants from Dark Knight Returns are now appearing in mainstream continuity. So these things do feed into each other. The Arkham Asylum and Arkham City games also, they're not entirely separate. So these things are kind of like overlapping stories of Batman.
The movie reminded me a lot of Arkham City in the second half.
Yeah, it really did. I think all the fight scenes, I think that again, it's either deliberate or it's just a subconscious influence, but the fight scenes reminded me very much of the video game, yeah. And some of the chase scenes looked a lot like GTA as well. The motorbikes and all the police cars chasing you. You know, I've been in that kind of situation in the GTA games.
I think the last time we spoke, the occasion was the release of Arkham City, and I'm actually not sure if I played it. Did you ever play it?
No, I played Arkham Asylum, but I haven't played Arkham City.
Oh my god, Arkham City, and this is something I've definitely talked about on the show before. It's like, even if you took the Batman aspects out of it, is one of my all-time favorite video games. But you couldn't take the Batman aspects out of it because they're so deeply integrated into like the gameplay and the core. You should really check it out. It's great. It's a great Batman thing too.
Yeah, the way I feel about games is they're so kind of big. I guess I'm kind of I'm so used to short things that don't take so much time anymore, like things like Twitter and Facebook and, you know, short films and so on. Games take so much commitment, don't they?
The game's open to a degree, and you could there's like a city to be explored,
okay.
But the story of it is probably only, I don't know, less than 15 hours anyway. It's like less than a season of a TV show.
Yeah, but that's if you're a good player, isn't it? You know,
no, I think even if you're average, if you have like a basic video game competency, and if you could play Grand Theft Auto, you could probably get the hang of this,
I'm still struggling a bit with Arkham Asylum, but you know, I enjoy it. I'm not progressing through the game itself very fast, but I do enjoy the fight scenes very much, and I think the sense of being Batman in that game is very enjoyable.
Yeah, both in the fight scenes and in the other major half of the gameplay, which is the stealth, where you're like sneaking up on people and kind of striking fear in their hearts.
Yeah, he's a thinker. Yeah, he uses the darkness, doesn't he? He adopts the darkness, as Bane says. And that detective mode is also very good, where you see people's skeletons and so on. You know, it's a very good game for combining satisfying action with a bit of intellectual challenge as well.
And Arkham City, and we don't have to get into the spoilers for it because I really want you to play it, also ends. It ends in a place where it'd be somewhat difficult to continue the Batman story meaningfully for a while.
That is interesting because, you know, I thought they might have aimed for a trilogy there rather than two.
Yeah, I think the rumor is that the next one, and I don't think it's confirmed, it's just a widely reported rumor, and I'm not sure if that's true or not, is that the next one's actually going to be a Silver Age follow-up, like a prequel to these games. And involve some of the other characters.
That would be very interesting indeed.
The only thing that'd be better than that is if Rocksteady, the company that makes these, decided to do an Adam West Batman game.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, yeah. The 1960s Batman, yeah, that's right. But actually, a prequel to Arkham Asylum could be sort of the Frank Miller Year One period, sort of 80s. You know, the Batman in his earliest days as an amateur who still makes mistakes. So it could go back to the mid-80s rather than the 50s and 60s.
Well, it's interesting, you know, when you play one of these video games, obviously you're stuck with Batman the whole time. That's actually not true. In Arkham City, you get to play as Catwoman a lot, and they make I think, well, you'd probably be interested in this from your Batman academics perspective. Arkham City kind of has some issues with their depiction of women. As much as I love the game, it's kind of hard to ignore. There's a lot of weird stuff with the way they treat women and like the things people yell at them in that game. Great game, but it gets a little iffy at that point. But you can play as Catwoman. So with that minor exception, when you're playing those games, you're stuck with Batman. But in Dark Knight Rises, there's not a whole lot of Batman in the movie.
No, there's not. But there's not a whole lot of Batman in Batman Begins either. I think there's probably about an hour before he appears in Batman Begins as well.
I mean, there's not even that much Bruce Wayne, but there's even less Batman.
Yeah, and the first time I saw it, first time Batman appeared, I kind of, you know, thought now the movie's really picking up, and I realised for about the first half hour or whatever before Batman Returns, I hadn't been enjoying it so much because I think there is something missing, you know, when Bruce Wayne isn't wearing the costume. But as I say, the movie had a job to do, which is partly to tie in back to the first to Batman Begins, and I think it had to do that partly by stripping Bruce Wayne of his wealth and stripping him of his Batman costume and making him rebuild himself as an anonymous nomad, as he did in the first film. Also, you know, partly the film seems to engage with ideas of class and privilege, And I think the sense was that Bruce Wayne is imprisoned there in Wayne Manor, and he's become soft. He's not fighting properly. He fights like a younger man, Bane says. And he has to get broken down and rebuild himself in order to triumph again. So I think the idea is that he has to lose the trappings of being Bruce Wayne, the money, the technology, and the house, and also the trappings of Batman in terms of the costume and the equipment. When he's fighting Bane, one thing I kind of wondered, I don't know if the film has an answer to this. The guy's got a utility belt with loads of weapons on it. He's fighting Bane and he's losing. All he does is pull out like 3 smoke pellets and throw them at him and turn the lights off. I mean, in all the comics I've read, Batman's got like an acid spray and so on, all manner of bombs and wires and grappling hooks on his belt. Kind of surprised me he didn't pull any of that out when he was fighting Bane and was about to have his back broken. But, you know.
Yeah, that surprised me too. I think that may be a thematic thing, because when he was fighting Bane there, I was also expecting to see a gizmo, just because that's what Batman often does.
Yeah.
It's kind of what gives him the edge sometimes.
Yeah.
But it seemed like the point of the scene was that Bane was his physical better. And if you incorporated the gizmos, that may have diluted that.
Yeah, but, you know, Batman's a clever guy, so it's a bit funny that he forgot that he had all these other weapons and he just lays into him with, like, massive punches all the time. Once he realised the punches weren't going to work, you know, firstly, the Batman that I know and love would probably have worked out that if you knock his mask off, that would be his weakness. And he didn't realise that until the last half hour. But, of course, I accept that has to happen in story terms. You know, Batman has to be beaten. It does raise the question, I think, though, you know, what was going on with the utility belt in that scene, that all he thought of doing was punching and punching and punching.
That is the rare scene where Batman is caught off guard. You don't often see someone pull one over on Batman.
No, well, Batman's weakness is Catwoman, I guess, isn't it? He's easily tricked by Catwoman. He's intrigued by her. It's partly Catwoman's fault that he gets trapped in there. And she's been one step ahead of him since the first scene with the pearls, I think, when she escapes out of his window with his mother's pearls. So it's a combination, really. He's let his guard down for various reasons. He's been out of the game for 8 years. Catwoman comes along. Maybe he gets kind of complacent. Catwoman traps him, and then Bane is his physical better, and that's the story.
Talia also manages to get one over on him, too. He is blinded by whatever her decoy name is. Miranda Tate. Batman is also fooled by a woman in Mask of the Phantasm, the movie based on the animated series. Is it possible one of his weaknesses is women?
I think Batman's weakness, I think that is one of his weaknesses. I think he underestimates women. I think he has a pretty kind of old-fashioned idea of women. You know, he idolizes his mother. His father is a very important figure to him. He always wants to, you know, be doing well by his father's memory. He mostly deals with men, with Gordon, with Lucius, and with Alfred. You know, even when there's a Robin around, his main relationships are with men. He lives this kind of very masculine bachelor life. His alter ego is a playboy, so he only deals with women as a sort of a decoy, a front to keep up the Bruce Wayne persona. You know, he just hangs around with airheaded women for that. So I don't think he's used to intelligent, challenging women, and I think he underestimates them. I think he's got an idea that women are really just there to be rescued or to be used as trophies or to be idealized like he does with his mother. You know, the whole idea with his mother and the pearls is like this precious thing can't be touched, this kind of holy memory of his mother. So, yeah, I think well, let's put it this way. I mean, Bruce Wayne's had a strange life, isn't he? His parents were killed when he was a young boy. He's been brought up in a big house by a butler. He's been cosseted and isolated from the world. So I don't think he's really had a lot of mature and sophisticated adult relationships, romantic relationships. So, yeah, he's easily fooled.
How did you feel about the film's depiction of Catwoman?
I think it was the movie's standout highlight. Actually, I think Anne Hathaway just stole every scene she was in. I mean, and everyone else was very good. So that's saying something. I mean, John Blake was probably, I think, my second favourite new element. I thought he was fantastic. Everything about his performance, his delivery, just he's such a kind of solid, straightforward, open character. But Selena Kyle, I just thought was just absolutely amazing. Hathaway's performance, and again, you know, I've seen this 3 times now, and you can kind of appreciate different aspects of it. The way it's so fluid, the way she slips from one persona to another, from being a kind of scared maid, and then it's like, oops, and she suddenly moves into a totally different mode, kicking Wayne's stick away and back flipping out the window. And then the next scene with Stryker, I think, the Daggett's minion, in the bar when they're exchanging Wayne's fingerprints for the clean slate. She changes from kind of like acting scared to suddenly she's the one in control. The SWAT team runs in. She starts screaming hysterically. And as soon as they're gone, she just walks out calmly. So it's absolutely brilliant performance of like subtle shifts between different types of behavior. And the way she shifts, she's like a waitress. And then she pulls off the trappings of the waitress and she's just wearing like a black dress with the pearls. So she can actually slip between social classes. I think that was an amazing performance by Anne Hathaway. Amazing in terms of acting, things like voice, and also physically. Obviously, it was a very, very demanding role physically. She looks great. Her fighting style is just incredible. Just the way she moves, you can't take your eyes off her.
Where does this Catwoman fit in with how the character has been depicted historically? Was Catwoman always kind of a good guy?
I'm not the biggest expert on Catwoman.
Did it come up in your Batman studies?
Well, there's too much Batman. I was mostly concentrating on Batman, actually. She first appeared in 1940, I believe, as a character just called the Cat, and that's the name they used for her in the movie as well. She's not actually called Catwoman, we should remember. The only time we see her with a code name is on the newspapers that Wayne and Alfred are looking at in the Batcave, which describe her as the Cat. So she first appeared as the Cat, a cat burglar. At one point, soon after that, she appeared wearing a full cat head, like something you would get for a costume party. And she's worn various costumes, adapting more than any other character in the Batman mythos, taking on different fashions and styles of the period, wearing the kind of clothes that women would actually fashionably wear in different decades. And it wasn't really until, I think, the mid-80s and Miller's Year One, probably, where she gains this backstory as being some kind of sex worker working in the red light district. But yes, I would say since her first appearance, there's been an element of flirtation and love-hate between her and Batman. In the first appearance, Batman pulls off her disguise and says to her, "Quiet or Papa spank." And then he lets her escape. And Robin's like, "Oh, what did you do that for, Batman?" And Robin doesn't understand because Robin's just a boy, And Batman's like, "Oh, I was just looking the other way, Robin." And Catwoman seems to have jumped off the Batboat. So I think the idea that he's got a soft spot for her is introduced right in the first story.
How does this version of Catwoman compare to the Halle Berry version of Catwoman?
To the extent that I won't even go and see the Halle Berry film. Yeah.
Have you never seen it? I've seen it.
No. Well, I've got other things to do with my time than watch a film that gets like 1% on Rotten Tomatoes.
But aren't you interested in how it could be like? It's the worst. That's kind of interesting. Like nothing is worse than it.
Is it worse than Batman and Robin? Is it worse than that?
I think it is, actually. I think it is. I really do think its reputation is correctly earned. I really think it is one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
I think you've made a very good point there. How can I be Dr. Batman and I haven't seen the Catwoman movie? You've shamed me there. I've given Batman and Robin a good chance. I've watched that a few times and really tried to like it. And I can like it for about half an hour. I certainly like parts of the movie Batman and Robin, but I have not seen Catwoman because it's got such terrible reviews. It's also treated by a lot of people as sort of separate from the Batman mythos, that it's not really part of that world. But yeah, okay, I will watch it. I will give it a chance.
Arkham City, Catwoman, we're piling up the Batman homework for you.
Yeah, there's a lot of Batman. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm not really doing my job here, am I? That's two things you found out that I'm not aware of. That's right. Well, I'm aware of them, but I haven't watched them or played them.
It's interesting that you said you focus on Batman, and so you don't know everything about Catwoman, because she kind of has evolved to be her own character and has a lot of her own non-Batman stories that are among the best stories in Batman's universe.
Well, I've read some solo Catwoman stories, but you understand there's an awful lot out there. You can't concentrate on everything. I don't know a lot about Robin either. You got to leave some things to other people.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's just like not every superhero has a character like Catwoman. Like Iron Man, all due respect to Pepper Potts, there's not a Catwoman in the Iron Man universe.
No, there's not really in Superman either, I don't think. But maybe this is why Batman is one of the most interesting characters, if not the most interesting, because of his rogues gallery and every different villain. I mean, if you count Catwoman as a villain, every different villain has got this unique relationship with him. I mean, I think he has a kind of love-hate relationship with Joker as well, which is similar to but different from what he has with Catwoman. With Joker, there's this kind of he can't Joker says in The Dark Knight, you know, you complete me. They can never kill each other. And there's lots of scenes where they're like in the tunnel of love or something on the fairground. They have this relationship where they kind of need each other in a way, not in a romantic way, but Batman defines himself against Joker's anarchic energy, and he kind of keeps coming back to Catwoman as well. And I think all the characters, Two-Face, Penguin, and so on, tell us something about Batman. Like Penguin is this old money capitalist, and Two-Face is, of course, a split personality like Bruce Wayne and Batman. So they're a brilliant rogues gallery, the people who have survived longest, and they all reflect some aspect of what Batman is.
Yeah, it's certainly, you know, we were saying that this movie's great, and there's not that much Batman. I think if you made an Iron Man movie where Iron Man was only in half the movie, and I'm sorry to keep picking on Iron Man, I like the Iron Man movies, it's just kind of the opposite of what we're doing here. If you made an Iron Man movie that Robert Downey Jr. was only in half of, it would be a disaster. Yeah,
it would. That's right. And that's one of the strengths about Batman. It's partly about the supporting cast. It's not just about Batman is a great character. I think he is. He's in a great world, you know. There's great stories around him. You know, there's even been comics just about the Gotham City Police Department.
Oh, it's a great comic.
Yeah, exactly. There's GCPD. Stories about just minor characters, you know, Gordon and other cops. The fact that in Dark Knight Rises, it must be about an hour of screen time that pretty much John Blake is dominating it. You couldn't do that with any other superhero I can think of. Rely on the secondary cast, because the secondary cast are so interesting in the Batman universe.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of one. I mean, I guess Spider-Man's number 2, but, like, is anyone going to read Mary Jane and Aunt May the comic?
No, not really. Yeah, it's a very good point. Yeah, Uncle Ben. Is his name Uncle Ben?
It's still Uncle Ben. Did you see the new Spider-Man movie?
No, I haven't. I was really kind of keeping myself pure for Batman. I will go and see the Spider-Man movie, but I don't feel I don't feel there's such a necessity for it.
I did not like it very much.
You didn't. Okay.
To say there's not a necessity for it is something of an understatement.
For me, it's a reboot too soon. You know, I'm not like 15 years old, so 10 years isn't such a long time ago for me.
Well, it's not that I mind.
I was happy with the old franchise.
It's not that I was happy with the old franchise too, even though Spider-Man 3 wasn't very good. And it's not that I mind them rebooting it necessarily and like creating a new Spider-Man movie continuity. I mean, that's what's going to have to happen with Batman. I don't mind that. But they spent like the time before he becomes Spider-Man, when he's like bitten by the spider and he's like, what's happening to me? It's such a chore we're just like, yeah, we get it. Just be Spider-Man. Or, you know, it's such a chore to get through that segment of the movie. And
well, I guess there can be no one going to see The Amazing Spider-Man who doesn't really know that Peter Parker is bitten by a spider. So you could almost just cut to that as the first shot, couldn't you? You don't really have to tell us that happens, because we all know that. We all know that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think if the movie had started from that spot, the rest of the movie, it's still not great, but it's not nearly as the problem I really have, and the parts they try to change, with they add his parents into the origin story, and like what were they up to, and what was my dad working on? Is like they're kind of the new element they try to inject, but it doesn't pay off at all. They kind of hint it might in the sequels, but it's just like mystery they've added on top of it.
Yeah. And I think maybe it's a bit of a Nolanized Batman, was my impression. When I went to see the cinema on a Thursday night, the poster for Amazing Spider-Man looked a lot like the poster for Dark Knight Rises. So my understanding is it's kind of part of this trend for, you know, darkness, and all the heroes have to wear uniform which looks a bit like armor. And Spider-Man, part of the appeal of the Spider-Man comics to me was they're quite light. You know, they're about a gawky teenager. He's always wisecracking. They're very, very different to Batman. So now I haven't seen the movie, so you'd have to comment. But it feels to me like The Amazing Spider-Man is a Nolan influenced Spider-Man. Is that the case?
I mean, I guess it is a little darker, but like it's not even in the same ballpark. It's not like truly dark, you know. There's like sad things that happen, but there's sad things that happen in the original Spider-Man too. Like Uncle Ben's death has to be a part of the story.
Yes.
I do think it was maybe influenced by that and kind of the general, as probably most superhero movies have been since then. But I don't know, it wasn't really dark. It certainly didn't achieve.
You know what I'd like to ask Spider-Man? If I met Spider-Man, I'd like to say, what was he doing when the Avengers were fighting Loki? Because, you know, he lives in New York, so where was he?
Did you enjoy the Avengers?
I enjoyed it like I would enjoy a theme park ride or a big bucket of popcorn or something.
I love theme park rides. That's a good.
Yeah,
that's good.
You know, it's good, but it's not like Batman for me. It's enjoyable, but it was fairly undemanding, and it didn't really raise a lot of questions for me to think about after I left the cinema. Whereas I think Nolan's Batman films, you can ponder over. There's a lot of things. In fact, it almost becomes more rewarding when you think about it afterwards. Whereas the Avengers, it's just, get on the ride, keep your hands and feet inside the vehicle, and now we're going to go and we're going to loop the loop, and then it's over, and you walk off smiling, which is all very good. But I think it's a different type of movie to what Nolan's trying to do with Batman. I think Nolan's trying to ask something quite different about heroism and myth and legends and masks and origins and identities and so on. I don't think Avengers was trying to do anything particularly complex.
But that's what's so great about them both coming out in the summer, I think, and why we're so fortunate in this movie-going summer. They are completely different movies, and I think I probably enjoyed them both as much as I can possibly enjoy a movie. I thought they were both incredible, but for totally different reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I did enjoy Avengers. I can't put it down.
I don't think anyone didn't.
It's a very enjoyable movie. But I mean, for me, Marvel Comics are what I pick up when I want to kind of relax from working on Batman. Batman is more of a kind of long-term investment for me. It's kind of ties in with work a little bit because it's partly, it's what I tend to write about. When I want to break from Batman, then I pick up like an X-Men comic or a Captain America or something. So for me, that's how I see Marvel. Marvel isn't something I know so much about. Marvel is more my rest and recreation, and I enjoyed it in that sense.
One character we haven't had much time to talk about yet is Bane. What did you think of Bane in this film?
Bane. Yeah, I think he was Gotham's reckoning, wasn't he? He was a lot better than Jeep Swanson in Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin. And I personally think
have seen those movies a lot. If you can name the guy that played Bane in Batman and Robin, you've spent a lot of time with that film.
Stuck in my head. There we go. I've kind of redeemed myself for not having seen Catwoman now, for remembering the name of the wrestler who played Bane. I preferred this movie Bane to the Bane from the comics as well. I've never been a big fan of Bane in the comic books. I don't think he was quite as fascinating and captivating as Heath Ledger's Joker, but I think Tom Hardy and Christopher Nolan did about as much with him as you could. He considering that all his face was covered, he expressed an awful lot with his eyes. You even feel quite sorry for him at the end, I think, when his eyes are brimming with tears, and he's been friend zoned by Talia al Ghul, who's been in love with all his life. As his voice, I actually, when I could understand it, I thought was very, very interesting, because he's got this very actorly kind of performative voice, this kind of refined voice. He really likes to perform and wave his arms about. So that's an interesting contrast with the wrestler build. He looks like someone who's just a thug, but he speaks like, an old style actor on a stage, like a Shakespearean actor. So again, I think there's a very interesting idea there about like mind and body, and double identity, because the way he speaks is so different from the way he looks. So I think he was an interesting character. I think the final twist about Talia and so on actually makes him a less interesting character, because all his talk about social revolution and giving Gothamites the freedom of their city was clearly just lies, really. It was just a front, just giving them hope.
But isn't that interesting in and of itself, that he's just propaganda like everyone else?
Yeah, it is. But it was empty propaganda. But then it turns out he wasn't even really the leader. He's just a kind of bodyguard for Talia, and all Talia was doing was fulfilling her father's destiny. So it becomes, that is kind of interesting. But for much of the movie, it seemed to be saying something about, possibly Occupy or something, or Arab Spring and urban unrest.
Yeah.
But in the end, it turns out all it was Talia doing what her father wanted to do, and Bane's in love with her, so he does what she tells him.
I do suppose,
and it's very personal.
You sacrifice some of the interestingness of Bane's character and thinking how he was behind everything to immediately build up Talia's character as the mastermind.
Yeah, but then you build it up for 10 minutes and all she does is drive a truck and die. So I didn't feel we got a lot of interest out of Talia.
That's a great point, though, that I did feel for Bane at the end of the movie. I'd forgotten about that moment, and you did feel really bad for him there. It's also interesting, Bane, they kind of, in the comics, just because of the way he's depicted as sort of a ridiculous hulking beast, Tom Hardy is a ridiculous hulking beast in real life, but in comic books, you can draw someone who's completely out of proportion. Yeah. And I think a lot of people who only vaguely remember Batman having his bat broken in the 90s think that Bane is just strong, but his intelligence has always been a part of the character, and if anything, they kind of toned down the superhuman strength here. Like, he was a really strong guy who could beat a Batman without hesitation, but, he couldn't punch through a wall or, lift a truck over his head like he could in the comic.
No, well, good, because in the comic he's powered by venom, which is just this kind of made up chemical, whereas in the film, more sensibly, his mask is supplying him with painkiller because of the treatment he suffered from the mob in the prison pit.
How did you know it was painkillers?
The doctor says so in the pit.
Oh, okay. I missed
that. The mask a painkiller? And the doctor says yes, because what happened is after he helped Talia out of the pit, the other prisoners during plague time all set on Bane, and he's looking up at her and goes, "Goodbye." And then they all jump on him. And by the time Ra's al Ghul returned with Talia to exact terrible revenge on the people in the prison, Bane was already injured, and the doctor had performed cack-handed attempts to heal him. The morphine addict doctor. And by that point, all they could do, I think, he was obviously deformed and, they hadn't healed him very well, was give him that mask to heal them, to control the pain.
I had missed
I mean, it's not a very realistic... Yeah, well, that's what I mean about there's an awful lot of detail in the movie.
Yeah.
And if you're not in a cinema with superb sound quality, you're going to miss a lot of the dialogue. And so much happens very quickly. It's a movie that you have to concentrate on and see multiple times. Having said that, I mean, I've never been in a hospital where the painkiller is delivered in a mask that looks like a kind of gorilla's head that straps on over the entire face. So there's something unrealistic about that. I mean, the mask is obviously designed partly to look frightening.
Also, masks being a large theme of the movie, and
well, that's true, of course. Yeah, the mask was important, as Bane says. No one cared who I was before I wore the mask.
Right.
He says that in the airplane.
I think it's like the first thing he says.
It's the second thing he says. Because the first thing he says is maybe he wondered why you would shoot a man before pushing him out the plane. That's
a pretty good Bane. And that was a good Batman earlier. You've been working on this.
When Gotham is ashes, you have my permission to die. Yeah, I'm gonna keep working on the Bane voice.
The Venom is an example, though, of what I was talking about earlier, where it's something that I think is a very, very large part of the comic book character. In the comic book and in the animated series and in video games, you pretty much don't beat Bane without a moment where Batman throws the Batarang and cuts off the cords to his back of his head and Venom's spraying everywhere. I think that even happens in Batman and Robin. So there must have been a moment where Chris Nolan looked at this character, looked at everything he had ever done, and said, you know what? I'm not going to have Venom. That's not going to be a piece of my Bane.
But there's a very similar moment when Batman punches him a couple of times in the face and we hear the hissing of his mask and the painkiller has stopped working. So that's how he defeats him in Dark Knight Rises. He punches him until there's this kind of metallic sound, and then we hear a hissing on the soundtrack, and it's clear that Bane is no longer being supplied with his painkiller. And that's when, after Talia has stabbed Batman between the ribs with her knife, this slow knife and so on, she quite lovingly reattaches Bane's mouthpiece. While she's talking and explaining about, how she's the daughter of Ra's al Ghul, she's fixing his mouthpiece. And then after that, Bane's like, we both know that I'm going to have to kill you now, Batman. So he's fine again after that. But the way Batman actually defeats him for the time that he does defeat him is by breaking the painkiller mask.
What is your thoughts on Lucius? Because Lucius, as much as I've spent time with Batman growing up, was a character I was generally unfamiliar with until this Dark Knight trilogy. He's never really been this big a part of the Batman mythos before, has he?
I don't think he has, no. He's certainly appeared. No, I think he's become a bigger part in the comics because of Morgan Freeman.
I was always under the impression Bruce Wayne kind of built his own gadgets and developed these things himself. So to have someone who is very obviously his Q, like Q from James Bond, who's like, why don't you see the new toys I've been working on, Mr. Wayne? It's a new piece of the Batman, how he works for me.
It is Q, and I mean, partly I think you make a very good point there, which is that Batman is in a dialogue with other stories surrounding it, just like the opening scene of Dark Knight Rises is like a James Bond scene, basically, the whole thing with the takeover of the plane. Morgan Freeman is Q because, Batman doesn't exist in isolation as a story. It's influenced by the stories going on around it, just like Batman of the 60s was influenced by pop art, and Batman of the 40s was influenced by the fact that America was at war with Japan. So, the Batman of this decade is influenced by the rebooted Daniel Craig James Bond. The interesting thing now is that if you look in the comics, Lucius Fox is now drawn to look like Morgan Freeman, and even says things like, yes, Mr. Wayne, it does come in black. So the films have influenced the comics again there. I mean, basically, to me, it's a good character, but it is almost Morgan Freeman playing Morgan Freeman. I doubt it's much of a stretch for the actor. It's a charming role. but he doesn't. I don't think he has an awful lot of scope. There's not a lot of variation. He just, as you say, he's just like, here's some new toys for you, Mr. Wayne. He fulfills a function of just showing the new gadgets. It is very much like Q.
What do you think, besides making Lucius Fox probably permanently look like Morgan Freeman and making the character a bigger deal, what is the impact of this movie on Batman canon? Every major Batman thing adds something, like Denny O'Neil's run or Frank Miller's run. And even to an extent, the Tim Burton movies and the animated series. So what from this movie is going to have a lasting impact on what we think of as Batman?
It's a complicated question because even Miller's comics are still part of comic continuity, even though they're separate, whereas Nolan's movies are entirely separate trilogy. They're not part of canon at all. So their influence on comic book canon and their dialogue and their interaction with comic book canon is even further removed from Miller's comics and the Arkham games and so on. What they've done so far is, there's small things like Lucius Fox, and they've influenced the look of Batman. They've made him look more armoured in the comics. He now, in contemporary comic book continuity, looks more like the Christian Bale Batman in terms of his suit, which is made up of multiple sections of military gear. It's very hard to say what effect The Dark Knight Rises will have on the comic book because it's only been out a day. We'd have to wait at least 6 months, I think, to see any effect. I think we might well see a revamped Bane within the comics now that the movies have done something interesting with him. Talia was already in continuity, playing quite a prominent role, but I think we could see Bane looking more like the Tom Hardy character and based more on the character that Nolan and Hardy developed.
What was the impact, looking back, of the first of Dark Knight, the last movie? It's hard to imagine. Joker must have gone through a dramatic change since that movie came out.
It was subtle because it's not as if the movie comes out and then the comics are adaptations of the movie. It's not as direct as that. It's certainly true that there's a lot of comics which came out after 2008's Dark Knight where Joker suddenly had facial scars and he didn't have them before. And, some comics creators have claimed that's just coincidence and they wrote that in before Dark Knight came out. Well, if it's coincidence, it's a pretty big coincidence. Suddenly Joker looks an awful lot like the Heath Ledger character. So, yeah, what happens really is rather than Joker suddenly starts looking like the one from the movies, it becomes a sort of hybrid. The movies influence, they kind of merge with the comic book character. It's not like they suddenly replace it. It's more like there's a sort of very slow evolution or a mutation whereby gradually you see that he becomes more like the Heath Ledger character. But it's not as if they suddenly adapt to fit the films because the films are their own separate thing. But I think if we looked at Batman comics in 2 years' time, we could probably see the influence of Dark Knight Rises on the comic book continuity, but it takes a little while.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, and Batman's probably the prime example of this. I think this is something we talked about last time, too, how he's like a cross-media character, or trans-media character, maybe, where each thing he appears in influences the next. So with that in mind, obviously they can't stop making Batman movies, even though Christopher Nolan probably doesn't want to do it anymore. So where do you go from here? How do you possibly follow this up?
Well, I had some ideas which won't be taken up by anyone. I'd like to see a 1960s Batman, which is like Mad Men rather than the Adam West one, a kind of very stylish, debonair Madman, a kind of Batman Mad Men on Wall Street with Kirby Joan Holloway character as Batgirl. Oh,
that's cool. I'm into that. Is there a comic book precedent for that? Obviously, Batman existed in the 60s, but with all the reboots of the DC universe, which, like the movies has to reboot itself every now and then, you kind of look at it as starting in the 80s because of Frank Miller, I think.
There is an Elseworlds which exists outside continuity called Thrill Killer, which was set in the 60s, but it wasn't exactly like that. No one's done a kind of Don Draper as Bruce Wayne, which I think they should do. I'd like to see a return of Batman to 1939 in a kind of Boardwalk Empire, Depression, Al Capone era gangster story, which is, again, taken seriously, done in a kind of modern way.
Wait, I want to go back. Don Draper as Batman. Yeah. Do you mean we should get John Hamm to play Batman?
I do. Yes,
do you think John Hamm would be a good Batman?
I think it'd be great, actually. I think it'd be a very good Bruce Wayne. Batman, it's harder to say, isn't it? Because George Clooney would have thought would be good, but he was no good as Batman. I think he would make a fantastic Bruce Wayne, though. He looks a lot like the Bruce Wayne in the 1943 serial. Actually, I think it would have to be phrased very, very carefully to not make it stupid. But I think you could do it.
So there's 60s Batman, 30s Batman. Where else could we put him?
Well, I tell you what I think they're going to do. Batman and the Justice League. That's what I think is going to happen.
That is definitely what they're going to do.
Yeah.
But that's not the best thing. I mean, that doesn't.
No.
I'm not very hopeful about that because now you're not making the best Batman movie you can. You're making the best Batman movie that can cross-promote the Martian Manhunter movie. I mean, if Ryan Reynolds shows up in a Batman movie, it's automatically going to be worse than any of the Christopher Nolan ones.
Well, you know that's not going to happen because they're going to do what they did with the Hulk for that. They're going to reboot the Green Lantern a couple of times, I think. Another thing I would like to see, you say where else could we go? Mid-80s, we could do Batman Year One.
I feel like they drew so heavily on Batman Year One for the Christopher Nolan one.
True.
Already. It was basically Batman Begins was Batman Year One.
Yeah. Okay then. Well, I've got my ideas. That's 1939 Batman.
I like it.
1965 Batman. That's what I'm throwing out there.
What about Dark Knight Returns? Do an old Batman, like future Batman.
Yes. Clint Eastwood.
Clint Eastwood. Could he still do it?
Well, in my head, he would do it.
You are absolutely correct that it's going to be something to tie into the Justice League. Did you see the Man of Steel trailer before Dark Knight?
No, they didn't show it. They showed some other stuff.
Oh, really?
Instead.
I assume they were just like automatically. Have you seen it yet?
No, I haven't.
Even without seeing the trailer. Any thoughts on that?
I heard it's very Nolan influenced. He's going to be producing it, isn't he? Is it Nolan and Snyder?
I believe Nolan is. It does say actually in the trailer. It's really more of a teaser. You barely see Superman. It says from the producer of the Dark Knight trilogy, which is fun to see.
Yeah.
Before you see the third movie,
yeah.
You know it's going to be so good. They already just went ahead and put it in other trailers.
That's right. Yeah. What I heard was it's a bit like Superman Begins. That it's very Nolan influenced. I don't think we can apply the Batman method to every character. I mean, personally, my favorite Superman is the first Christopher Reeve film. I think Superman, like Spider-Man, has to be distinct from Batman, and we can't try and play him in the same way. The nice thing about Superman is his kind of naivety and kind of Boy Scout aspect. I don't really want to see him in a darker uniform wearing... He doesn't have to wear something armoured. He's Superman. He could go around wearing a diaper, and no one could hurt him. He doesn't have to wear something which is all kind of textured and built up because he's the most powerful creature on Earth. And I think Grant Morrison did that right in All-Star Superman. He's just a guy who's so relaxed because nothing really can touch him. He's generous and happy and relaxed because he's like a god walking on Earth. So I really don't want to see a Superman who's all kind of dark and wearing this bad guy, hard-ass suit. I don't think we have to treat him like Batman because Batman is what he is because he's a human being and Superman is a god.
It seems like DC, with as much money as the Avengers made, they're going to have to... They're obviously looking and they're talking about doing a Justice League movie. Is there any way to successfully integrate all these characters? It just seems like, it seems like DC and Marvel are doing such different things that for DC to start trying to do the other companies thing could be disastrous.
Yeah. But I can see why they think that's what they have to do if the Nolan trilogy is over, because that's been their most successful superhero film. They do have to find something else to do. I can imagine you could probably have a good kind of Flash movie, and you could have a good Wonder Woman and a Green Lantern.
I'd see Martian Manhunter. I was kidding, but I'd go see Martian Manhunter.
Yeah, you could. I mean, if they're making an Ant-Man movie, you could do Martian Manhunter. I don't really want to see them scraping the bottom of every barrel. We have to have movies about the Wasp and so on.
It's all about who does it. Like, even though Ant-Man is not a character I'm particularly interested in seeing adapted to film. The fact that they got Edgar Wright to do it, I'll go see the next Edgar Wright movie. If it happens to be Ant-Man, so be it.
Yeah, I agree. Although having said that, you've got directors with pretty different styles working on these movies. So how's that going to work out when you bring them all together? I mean, Joss Whedon did a very good job.
Well, I think Marvel has kind of homogenized the product. Like Thor and Captain America and Iron Man are all from like pretty good to great. I don't think any of them are terrible in the way that Green Lantern is, but they're all kind of the same too. And I think you eliminate both the risk, but you also eliminate the chance of doing something as grand and epic and unique as Dark Knight Rises.
Well, what you said is true, but they did manage to reboot Hulk twice because the last two Hulk films didn't do too well. So yes, they did have Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America, which were on the same kind of level, but they brought Hulk back from a kind of failing franchise.
Well, I think Hulk, the first Ang Lee Hulk, is actually a good example. It's probably the last time that Marvel made a movie that was really unique, and it's not great, but that is a crazy movie that like could not, it'd be difficult for that Hulk, that movie to cross over with Iron Man in the way.
No, you got a good point there. Yeah, it's become homogenized, and that's why I didn't sound as enthusiastic as you maybe about the Avengers, because I think it's kind of it feels like product to me. You know, it's all very good. It does what you expect it to, but it didn't really surprise me in a way. It did what it did very well. And okay, that's, you know, it's not the best example because Joss Whedon does have a particular knack for dialogue. It did have his kind of style, his kind of stamp with characterization, but too much, I think these movies are just kind of, they do what you expect them to do, and then they're finished, and they didn't really surprise you or challenge you in any way. And I think that's what's going to happen with the Marvel Entertainment franchise. They're just kind of satisfying popcorn movies, and that's all they are.
Yeah, it's hard to complain. I mean, I think you're absolutely correct about everything you said, but at the end of the day, I like it. I like that product. I'm susceptible to it.
Yeah, I mean, I like, you know, sometimes you want a McDonald's, and there you go.
Yeah.
And that's what they are for me. They're a good McDonald's, or they're a good theme park, or a good Coca-Cola or something.
I wonder if they have to just do the opposite of what Christopher Nolan's doing, and maybe they go back to the camp direction and try to do the craziest thing possible.
What they could do is find another interesting director like Nolan. I'll tell you who they could find. Duncan Jones, David Bowie's son, who did Moon and Source Code, yeah. And give him a character like Green Lantern or something, and just say, you know, do your own thing with that. Because that's what they did with Nolan. It's maybe easy to forget now, but Nolan was a big risk as a director. Nolan was regarded as a pretty independent, small-scale director. He just spun Memento and Insomnia, I think, by the time they gave him Batman Begins. He wasn't a safe pair of hands at all. And he'd done Following, of course, his first film. But he was considered an intelligent and challenging and sophisticated director, and they gave him this huge blockbuster to direct. Go to Duncan Jones and say, you know, do what you want with Martian Manhunter and Green Lantern, see what happens there, or Flash or whatever. So give it to a director who's going to do something interesting. Take a risk again.
There's Marvel, the studio, who's responsible for the Avengers and everything that falls under that umbrella. Sony, who's a different movie studio, actually made Spider-Man, and they did kind of do that with Spider-Man when they got Mark Webb, who had done, his last movie was 500 Days of Summer.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, fine. Well, they've done that, okay.
I mean, I think to their credit, they have chosen interesting directors, like Kenneth Branagh. No one saw that coming for Thor.
Yeah.
And now for the upcoming Captain America movie, you have Anthony and Joe Russo, who've directed Arrested Development and Community. And Alan Taylor is his name, who's directed a lot of HBO shows, like a lot of Game of Thrones and a lot of everything on HBO.
Well, okay, I came up with an idea, and you're correct in saying maybe they've already done that. I'm just thinking, what could you do? What could DC do to go in a different, distinct direction from Marvel? And I'm saying they could give it to like an auteur who's going to do something a bit indie. What you're saying is true, that they did have different directors, but you also said, I think rightly, they have the same kind of overall feel and tone. Despite the different directors on the Marvel superheroes, they feel like similar product, and they had to, so they could fit them into the Avengers. But what you could do if you were at DC is just say, well, we're not going to try and fit these things together. We're just going to have, you know, the Duncan Jones Green Lantern trilogy or something, and just let him do his own thing in isolation and just make a great pair of films, or a great trilogy of films.
I think DC also, I mean, you can take a lot of risks, and sometimes they're not going to pay off, but sometimes they do. And Christopher Nolan's obviously one that really did, and has proven also with Inception. Along the way, he made a little movie called Inception, which was also pretty good and pretty interesting. I mean, they seem to have just really struck gold, and it's going to be really interesting to see what he does next. I mean, he could do anything he wants, and he seems like he's a guy with some interesting ideas.
Yeah, Nolan's barely put a foot wrong for me. Insomnia, I think, is probably his weakest film, but that's still a good movie. Pretty much everything he's done, I love, actually. Prestige doesn't hit all the marks for me, but again, it's a very challenging and ambitious film. He's just a great director. I can't think of anyone recently who's made such a consistent run of movies which aren't just interesting, but also incredibly entertaining. He manages to produce films which kind of exciting and thrilling and spectacular, but also ask some questions. So, you know, I'm in awe of the guy. I'm a great admirer of Christopher Nolan. I think he's done brilliant work. He's probably the most exciting director I can think of right now. How
many years away do you think we are from a Batman reboot?
3. There's on IMDb. There's a obviously this is unconfirmed, but there's a Batman reboot scheduled for 2015. I think Not more than 5.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, that's what it was for Spider-Man.
Yeah,
You probably start making it after we see how people respond to Superman next summer.
that's right. Yeah, there's gonna be other DC characters who come in first, I think, and then Batman's gonna come back.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll make his first reappearance in the Justice League movie. I mean, this is all hypothetical, but perhaps there'll be like, a Green Lantern movie, another one, a Flash movie, the Wonder Woman movie might finally come out, the whole Man of Steel franchise, if that takes off, and then maybe we'll see kind of the big return of Batman in the Justice League movie.
So you've seen this movie 3 times already. It's only Saturday morning.
Yeah.
You have all these notes on it. You are probably, at this point in time, outside of the people that worked on the movie, the world's expert on this film. What is it that people aren't talking about with this movie?
I think people are kind of missing the point and rushing in when they are trying to claim that the movie has a clear political message, that Batman is a kind of capitalist, that it's an anti-Occupy movie, that he's privileged, and the movie shows Batman, a billionaire, siding with the police and leading an army of cops against protesters. I think it's not a movie with a simple political message at all. The more I think about it and the more I see it, the more I think that, for better or worse, it doesn't offer any clear political messages. Now, I mean, you could say that's because Nolan starts to engage with topical themes and dresses his superhero thriller up in motifs which seem to echo Arab Spring, as I say, the Occupy movement, the riots in London last year, and then they abandon them for this story about personal revenge and Talia al Ghul fulfilling her father's wishes. So you could say that maybe he's touching on on political issues to try and give the film a sense of contemporary relevance and then backing off. Or you could say that he's just raising questions and then refusing to give any easy political answers. And I'd like to think that, well, the second one is a more generous and positive interpretation. I also think The Dark Knight was kind of about the war on terror, and it was read as being, in simple terms, pro-Bush or anti-Bush. It was read as either showing that the Bush administration policy worked, or showing that those kind of techniques were useless, because when Batman interrogated Joker, it didn't get any useful information. When he used a surveillance machine on the people of Gotham, he insisted that Lucius destroy it, and so on. When he practiced extraordinary rendition on Lau, it didn't get him useful information. So people read Nolan's Batman movies as saying either one thing or another thing on the political divide, on the political spectrum. And I think rather that what they do is raise questions and explore those issues, but I don't think they come down on one side or another. So I think people who are rushing to say that this is a conservative capitalist hero are declaring the side too soon.
In the end, it's not really what it's about. He's using all those issues as a smokescreen. Yeah,
you could say that, but that doesn't sound very positive for Nolan. I mean, to use real world political issues as kind of a front and a smokescreen. I think you could easily say that just like Bane's speech in the football stadium, it's just a front. It's just a performance. Like when he says, we're giving Gotham back to the people, do as you please. You're the rulers of this city now. And then it turns out that in fact it's just tanks on the street and real citizens are hiding in their homes. You could say that that's very superficial and kind of an empty gesture for Nolan to say, well, I'm going to make a superhero movie. I'm going to try and court controversy by making it look a bit like Occupy in some scenes. So I think it's too early to call. I mean, yes, I have seen the movie a number of times now and written notes on it, but my response would be I wouldn't want to come out with a conclusion so soon about a film which I think is pretty complex.
Yeah, I don't think you ever... I think with a movie this good and this complex, that you don't ever really come to a conclusion either. Isn't it kind of an ongoing discussion? Like, we're still talking about great movies and what they mean.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think The Dark Knight is pro or anti-Bush. I think you can think about it for as long as you like and watch the movie as long as you like. I do think the movie asks questions about the war on terror and whether it's justified to use the tools of a terrorist to capture a terrorist, whether it's justified to use harsh interrogation and torture in a ticking bomb scenario where more lives are at risk. But I don't think it comes out with easy answers to those questions. I think to its credit, it does engage with those questions, and it does ask questions which are very relevant to contemporary society, but I don't think it has apolitical moral.
Well, you know, Green Lantern had a lot of interesting things to say about international politics in North Korea.
Oh, did
no,
it?
definitely not. It's
Well, you know, to my shame again, I haven't seen Green Lantern.
God.
Because I watched the trailers for these movies and I read the reviews and I think, you know, I could save myself £10 on that one.
Here's what I could say about Green Lantern. See Catwoman first. That's how bad Green Lantern is.
Oh, that's how bad it is. Wow. I'm going to have a double bill one weekend.
I think Catwoman's worse, but Green Lantern is less interesting. That's how bad Green Lantern is.
I'll tell you what I think I should do. I should look online for some kind of drinking game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know any other way to get through the movie.
Yeah. I'll just get drunk beforehand, maybe.
Isn't it unbelievable to you? Don't you feel like this we've been waiting for it for so long and pretty much talking about it since the last Batman movie come out?
Yeah.
Isn't it hard to believe that you finally actually saw it?
It's kind of sad. It's kind of sad because I was looking forward to it for so long. I mean, obviously, I'm glad it didn't disappoint in any way. I think it does a great job of wrapping up as a trilogy. One of its great achievements, I think, is that it makes them feel like a coherent set of 3 films. Whereas before that, I thought that Dark Knight felt like quite a distinct film from Batman Begins.
Definitely, yeah. It really pulled them all together.
Yeah, so it pulls them together very well.
Which I wasn't expecting because I didn't see Dark Knight and Batman Begins as necessarily of a piece.
No, not at all. They seem very, very different. So that, I think, is one of its great achievements. His other great achievement is it wraps up the trilogy while introducing exciting new things, new plots. It takes us to new places for Batman. It introduces 2 great new characters in Selina Kyle and John Blake. So I don't know. There's a mixture of sort of regret and relief, isn't there? It's relief that Nolan did wrap it up and the last 5 minutes is some of the best thing I've seen in the cinema, you know, in my life. You know, I've seen so many films, you know, I'm not a young man. I don't get so excited and moved by cinema anymore. But those last 5 minutes when fans will know what I'm talking about, the drums start rising and John Blake enters the cave and, you know, Alfred spots Bruce Wayne across the table in Florence and then The Dark Knight Rises and the title comes up, you know, it's just incredible. It's a primal experience for a fan and cinema goer. And that gives you a great sense of, you know, of conclusion.
Yeah, it's almost like a vacation, you know. It's almost more fun to look forward to going to vacation and anticipate that upcoming vacation than it is to actually go. And you do feel a little sad when you come back.
But when you come back, you know, you can do what I'm doing with Dark Knight, which is enjoy the memories. And you talk about it with the people you're on vacation with. You talk about it with friends. I mean, the problem for me is seeing it on Wednesday night, I couldn't talk about it with anyone. Because everyone I knew, they didn't want spoilers, understandably. So, you know, I had it all in my own head. So I'm really glad people have started seeing the movie now so I can, you know, talk openly about it. Because for a while I felt like I had these secrets which I couldn't reveal.
And the other great thing about the movie that we really haven't even talked about that much is that it's just awesome. It's just fun and like a Batman movie should be.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of movie in there. Like the part with when Bane was at the stadium, I thought, oh, this movie's starting to wrap up. There was another hour of it after that.
Yeah.
There's so much movie and it's so fun.
One of my favourite bits is Bane at the stadium when he's just standing there listening to the boys singing, "Oh, lovely, lovely voice."
Oh, I forgot about that part. That's so great.
There's some amazing comedy in it. I mean, you know, there's just some amazing lines which are really just for fans, like when Selina Kyle disappears from Batman. He's like, so that's what that feels like.
I thought it was weird in that scene that when he says, so that's what it feels like, that even though he's talking only to himself, he still uses the Batman voice and not the Bruce Wayne voice.
But that's fun. That's hilarious in itself. And there's another hilarious bit where he's in the hospital and rather than walking down the stairs to go and see Commissioner Gordon, he pulls on a ski mask, props open a window with his cane, abseils down, and then talks to Gordon wearing a ski mask in the Batman voice and a suit, and Gordon doesn't know it's Bruce Wayne. So, I mean, there's some elements which is just sheer, almost ridiculous comedy.
Yeah.
He uses the Batman voice just whenever his face is covered by the look of it. He can't get out of that habit.
Last time you were on the show, you made an offer. You gave out your email address and said, if anyone wants to talk about Batman, email me. Can we do that again?
Yeah, people did email me.
Yeah, I heard from a lot of people that emailed me to say that they had emailed you and that they had talked to you and that it was great.
That's good. It was great for me as well.
So can we do that again?
Great for me. Please, yeah. If you want to talk about Batman. Now we can all talk openly. I mean, I don't want to offer spoilers to someone who doesn't want spoilers, but, you know, assuming we can all Well, this is a spoiler zone
Yeah.
here, isn't it? We've declared it. If you haven't seen the movie, you shouldn't be listening.
We're all cool.
It's Dr. Will Brooker, as one word, at gmail.com.
And your book, too. Can we plug your book?
Yeah, please do. The book is called Hunting the Dark Knight, 21st Century Batman. The book is published by the company IB Taurus. And that's available easily on Amazon.com and Amazon.co.uk.
And are you going to update the book with Dark Knight Rises?
Do you know what? I was just thinking that. Yeah, I'm going to approach my publisher about that next week and see if we can have an extra chapter. Because, yes, I think you could. I think that would be the place for it. Maybe release it with the DVD on the Blu-ray. I think there's enough to say about this movie that I could write another chapter. Yeah.
I'm sure there is. I mean, it seems like you probably won't have to add another chapter for a while. You know, this is one of the major updates to Batman for a while.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I had a plan that after the book came out, I'd write another book in like 10 to 12 years. But I think, it could be appropriate just to finish off Nolan trilogy to say something about Dark Knight Rises, because they're all of a piece. You know, it continues the discussion from The Dark Knight and Batman Begins. So I'm gonna pitch that idea. Yeah.
But before you publish that book, you got to play Arkham City and watch Catwoman.
Yeah. Okay. And Green Lantern.
No, you can skip Green Lantern.
I promise I will.
All right. Perfect. Dr. Will Brooker, thank you so much for coming back to the show.
Thank you again.
One quick follow-up to something that was briefly discussed in this episode. Obviously, as soon as we were done recording, I had to know how did they pronounce Ra's al Ghul's name in the animated series. Did a little bit of research, found this clip from Batman Beyond, which is part of the Batman the Animated Series canon. This is Talia al Ghul speaking in Batman Beyond.
Father's name was pronounced Ra's, not Raz. A common mistake.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I don't know when you are listening to it. I usually post new episodes on Tuesday, but I actually posted this one a little sooner because it was ready to go, and I knew how many people were seeing this movie and were anxious to hear about it or anxious to talk about it. You would have known that if you were following me on Twitter, where I am at Jeff Rubin Show, on Tumblr, where I am jeffrubin.com, or on my Facebook fan page, or at youtube.com/Jeff Rubin. Sometimes I post the episodes a little earlier just to get feedback, and definitely not just to make sure they're working, because that would be sloppy if I ever put one up and it wasn't working. But sometimes I will use my vast social media empire to release episodes early. So, get on that if that's something that interests you. I don't care if it's not. Doesn't bother me. Thank you again to Dr. Will Brooker. Read his book. Email him about his book. I'll be back next week. Let's talk then. Bye.